Good morning, it's day 31 of our Lent Readings for 2022, and today we're going to be looking at the book of James. Now, there are several people who are candidates in the New Testament called James to have written this. There could be James, son of Alphaeus, one of the apostles, or James, the brother of John, another apostle, former fisherman. But the early church are unanimous. This was written by James, the brother of Jesus. Now, he first appears in the Gospels when it lists the brothers and sisters of Jesus. James is among them. And then when you get to 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says that after Jesus' resurrection and he appeared to a number of people, one of them was James. And maybe at that point that's when James was converted. We don't know. What we do know is that on the day of Pentecost, James was one of those in the upper room with the apostles. We know that James went on to be the leader of the church in Jerusalem. And when Paul goes up to Jerusalem in chapter 15 of Acts, James is leading the church. When Paul goes back to Jerusalem in Acts 21, James is still leading the church. And the stories go that James would lead the church until AD 62 when he was martyred. Evidently, when Festus, the governor had died, some Jews took the opportunity before another governor was appointed to kill James. So, who is James writing to? He says he's writing to the 12 tribes scattered across the nations, which sounds very Jewish. But if you read the letter's very Christian. And what it would seem is that James is seeing that the church, the Christians, they are the inheritors of Abraham's promise. We are all Abraham's children. So what he's doing is writing to the whole church scattered across the nations, and not to any specific congregation and not to any specific individual. He's writing a letter which is to be copied and spread right across the church. It's a very practical letter, a letter with lots of instructions, and a letter that quotes Jesus more than any other letter in the New Testament, and not always directly, frequently rewording passages from the Sermon on the Mount. So it would seem that James was very familiar, probably there at the Sermon on the Mount, and has rewritten the words of Jesus into his letter. And it's famously a letter that Martin Luther, the great reformer, did not like. In fact, if you have a Lutheran Bible, often they've put James at the end after Revelation. He thought that James's view of faith and works contradicted Paul. But they're on the same page. Both Paul and James would say that we are saved by faith alone, but our faith is proved genuine by the works that we do. He's writing to the church under persecution, the church under suffering and trials. Maybe not the persecution which came under certain emperors where Christians were targeted, but the social and economical struggles that they had, because Christians were often ostracized and isolated in society, and often they would suffer financially, suffer economically. We see that in Paul's letters. He often is giving appeals to collect money for the churches suffering under famine, because in those times the Christians would be the ones that suffer the most and the last in any order for getting any sort of handout. I want to read this morning just the first few verses of this letter and how James begins writing to persecuted, suffering Christians. James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes scattered among the nations, greetings. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking in anything. What an opening to a letter. When you go through trials, embrace them, rejoice. That might seem difficult, but that's a common theme. Consider Paul's writing in Romans 5. We glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope. Peter, writing in his the first chapter of his first letter. In this we greatly rejoice, though now we go through trials and suffer grief of many kinds. These have come that our faith may be proved genuine. The New Testament writers all expect Christians to suffer. Jesus himself told us that if we follow him, we will suffer struggles and trials. We will have to, in his words, pick up our cross and follow. And we see this right through the New Testament. We see people like Paul going often through trials and difficulties and struggles, and yet these proved him to be the character he was and to be useful in God's hand. We see it in the Old Testament. We see the characters like Joseph and Daniel who went through difficulties, but it made them the characters they were, to be useful in God's hands. And we see it in the church today. Think of a person whose faith you most admire, the person who seems to have the deepest faith, whether it's someone you know or someone you've read about. Almost certainly they in their life would have been through difficulties and struggles and trials at times, which has refined their faith. So hard as it may be, when trials come along, embrace them and rejoice, because God is testing you to bring the best out of you, that your faith may be proved genuine. Until next time, have a blessed day.